One day, I wasn't feeling well, so I stayed in bed while everyone else went to work. I had just fallen asleep when my subconscious picked up on a slight scraping sound, like a door sticking. I sat up to listen but didn't hear anything. Only when I laid back down and closed my eyes did the sound return, with scraping against wood. The house was very old, dating back to the mid-1800s, so I figured it might be the downstairs screen door. I got up and stood at the top of the balcony, looking down. There was nothing. I went back to bed, closed my eyes, and drifted off again. At some point during my sleep, I felt a hand gently caressing my back. I smiled, thinking my husband had come home early. I mumbled something, half turning to thank him, but when I looked, there was no one there. Startled, I jumped out of bed, calling for my husband as I ran downstairs, nearly tripping in my rush. Grabbing the railing to steady myself, I paused, shocked that the house was completely empty. I stood there, listening intently, when suddenly I heard a door upstairs squeak open. Fear gripped me, and I rushed outside, sitting on the porch swing to wait for my husband to get home. 3 hours later, he pulled into the driveway. When he saw me wrapped in a comforter outside, he hurried over, asking if I was okay. I explained the eerie sounds I had heard, the scraping wood and the feeling of someone rubbing my back. He looked at me strangely, told me to stay outside, and quickly went inside to check. Worried about him, I followed. We went upstairs, and he checked every corner, but there was nothing. Relieved, I sighed, and he suggested I had probably just been dreaming. I wasn't so sure, but I agreed and climbed back into bed, letting him cover me up. He said he'd be downstairs and to call if I needed anything. I relaxed, hearing him moving around in the kitchen, and drifted off again. I don't think I'd been asleep for long when the scraping sound returned, louder this time, waking me instantly. Frozen in place, I felt panic rising. Just as I was about to scream, the bedroom light flipped on, and there stood my husband. He motioned for me to stay quiet and come to him quickly. I crawled out of bed and ran to him, and he whispered for me to go downstairs. I refused. He grabbed his gun, and that's when I noticed the small attic door was slightly open. I gasped as he approached it, yanking the door open. Suddenly, a freezing gust of wind rushed out, enveloping us both. The attic door slammed shut, and I screamed. My husband jumped in shock, grabbed my hand, and we both bolted out of the room, racing down the stairs. Exhausted and terrified, we decided to sleep downstairs on the sofa bed for the night. I couldn't fall asleep, too scared to close my eyes. I kept checking the clock. It was 3 a.m., the so-called witching hour. My heart pounded as I waited. Sure enough, I could hear the attic door creaking open and closed, over and over again, by itself. I silently cried in fear, knowing I'd be left alone in the morning when my husband left for work. At 5 a.m., my husband told me he wasn't leaving me alone in the house. He decided to take the day off so we could look for another place to live. I cried with relief and hugged him tightly. Thankfully, we found a new house that same day and hired movers to handle everything from the old place. I refused to step foot in that house again. Once we were settled in our new home, we had family over. Someone asked why we had moved, and we explained that the bedroom in our old house was haunted. They looked shocked and asked what had happened. I recounted the strange sounds, the feeling of someone rubbing my back, and the attic door slamming shut. Everyone was stunned. Then my brother asked if that was all that had happened. My husband came over and wrapped his arm around me. He admitted there was something he hadn't told me at the time. He explained that when he had heard the scraping sounds upstairs, he rushed up, knowing I was alone. When he reached the top of the landing, he saw a man standing next to me. The moment he flipped the light on, the figure vanished. That's when he decided we couldn't stay in that house any longer. Even now, I still have nightmares about that bedroom and the man standing next to me, rubbing my back. The thought of it still chills me to the core. I was about 12 at the time. One day, after getting off the school bus, I walked home. By the time I got there, I was hot and needed to use the bathroom. Our house was small, one of those 1950s style brick homes you'd find in the rural southeast. It had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room. It was about 1,000 square feet, so there weren't many places for anyone to hide inside. I walked in through the back door, set my books down, and headed straight for the bathroom. It was a sunny, peaceful day, and I was just sitting there when I heard someone call my name from outside the door. The voice seemed to come from the end of the short hallway that ran down the middle of the house. It called me by my childhood nickname and sounded like my mom, except my mom was at work and I was completely alone in the house. I froze, unsure of what to do. I was convinced there had to be a burglar in the house. I finished as quickly as possible, then made my way to the bathroom door, bracing myself for what I might find. I looked down the hallway to my right and left, but no one was there. Scared, I ran outside and waited until my mom came home. When she pulled into the driveway, I told her what had happened. She checked the house, but no one was there. She told me I was just hearing things and that it was all in my head. Maybe it was. Fast forward to when I was in the 7th or 8th grade. I was home alone again in that same house. My parents were gone for the day, and it was a cold, dreary weekend. I decided to get some homework done. I sat down at the kitchen table with my books and notebook. To my left was the hallway. If you walked down it, the bathroom was on the right, followed by my bedroom. On the left were my parents' bedroom and my brother's room. My brother, being much older, was rarely home. The house was completely silent. The weather outside was bleak, and the limited windows meant the house had that dim, hazy lighting you get on overcast days, adding to the quiet and stillness. I was focused on my homework and enjoying the solitude. Then, from the end of the hallway to my left, I heard a woman say my name again, clear as day, using my childhood nickname. My blood ran cold. Slowly, I looked down the hallway, but there was nothing there. Fear took over, and I quietly closed my books, grabbed my jacket, and ran out the back door without looking back, tears welling up in my eyes. I made my way to the standalone garage out back and sat on my dad's red lawnmower, keeping my eyes on the back door to see if anyone came out of the house. But I knew it was impossible for anyone to be inside, as no one had been home all day. Still, I sat there shivering for what felt like hours until my parents finally got home. I ran to them as soon as they pulled into the driveway and told them what had happened. They checked the house again and found nothing, insisting it was all in my imagination. Today, my mother still lives in that house, and I live with her now to help out since she's elderly. My father passed away several years ago. Mom often tells me how she used to hear my dad calling her name from the living room. She'd go in to ask what he wanted, only to find that he hadn't called for her at all. Even now, she insists it's just her imagination. I honestly feel like something has followed me my whole life. The first time I was truly terrified was when I was a teenager. I couldn't sleep without the lights on and some noise, either music or the TV, because I would often see a face hovering in the space above my door. One night, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. I turned the lights off, but of course, I saw the face again. I had to go to the bathroom and was trying to work up the courage to get out of bed. I wrapped a quilt over my head, thinking it would somehow protect me. My apartment was tiny, and the bathroom was only about 5 steps from my bedroom, so it should have been an easy trip. I rushed out of my room, but as I tried to leave, something grabbed onto my blanket. I was terrified, pulling and struggling, until I finally felt whatever it was let go. I ran into the bathroom, collapsed on the floor, and just cried for what felt like an hour. When I finally pulled myself together and returned to my room, I turned the light on and looked around. There was nothing in the path I had just run that could have caused what I felt. A chill ran down my spine. Years later, I was living in a different city with some roommates, and I had just taken in my grandpa's dog. I had this rule for myself. If I got scared but the dog didn't react, then I could dismiss it as nothing. One night, I thought I had a nightmare about something standing in my doorway. We all slept with our doors closed, and my roommate with the cat always kept it in her room at night. As I slowly woke up from the nightmare, I tried to calm myself down, but I realized I couldn't move. I was staring at my closed door, but something about it seemed darker than usual. Just then, My dog started growling, a deep, threatening sound that broke me out of my paralysis. I sat up and grabbed her, but she kept growling for a few minutes. I finally got up, turned the lights on, and tried to settle down. The next day, I told my roommate about what had happened, and she got really quiet. She told me that she had experienced strange things with spirits her whole life and felt she had a spiritual connection to help get rid of them. She also admitted she had been feeling a bad presence for a few days, and that it had all seemed to come to a head the previous night. That left me trembling. She came into my room later that day and did a powerful prayer, commanding whatever it was to leave. After that, I never had any more issues in that house. My dog never acted like that again either. Even though I experienced other strange things after I left that place, I genuinely believe she did something that stopped it from coming back to her space. To this day, I have trouble sleeping when I'm alone, and I still rely on my animals to let me know if there's really something to be afraid of. Me and my older sibling were staying at home. We lived in a small town in Ohio, with fewer people than the number in my mom's graduating class from the city we came from. My sibling was grounded, and both the house phone and their personal phone were locked in my dad's gun safe, which neither of us knew the combination to. The reason for being grounded was something silly and arbitrary. I can't quite remember why. Our grandparents lived down the street, and my great-grandmother had a small house built on their property so she could be independent but still close by. My parents told us they were going to check on my great-grandmother since my grandparents were out of town, and they'd be back soon so we could order pizza. That sounded good to 7-year-old me and my 15-year-old sibling. We played video games for a while, starting to get hungry and wonder when our parents would be back. After about 2 hours, there was a knock on the door. I went downstairs, pretty excited, thinking it was the food, and my sibling followed a little behind after saving the game. I walked up to the door, which had a large window in it, and it wasn't my parents. Instead, there was a very tall, lean white guy with short black hair and scruffy facial hair. He looked about 25 years old. It was jarring because everyone knew everyone in this small town, and I had no idea who this guy was. I held up my finger, signaling 1 second, and closed the curtain. I turned to see my siblings staring at the door in disbelief because they had seen him too. Within seconds, the knocking turned to pounding, and then the doorknob started shaking and rattling. Terrified, and with no way to call our parents, my sibling grabbed my hand and ran me into the kitchen. They grabbed a knife, but I distinctly remember it breaking in their hand, so they quickly grabbed a different one. We hid in the laundry room, holding each other tightly. We could still hear the banging and pounding, and after what felt like hours, though it was probably just 5 minutes, the front door opened. One thing about my sibling is that they have always been ready to protect me at a moment's notice. They were prepared to jump up with their crappy kitchen knife and defend me the moment that guy got too close. Instead, my mom rounded the corner, holding 2 pizza boxes and looking completely confused as to why her 2 kids were crumpled in a heap of tears on the floor. We both jumped up and told her about the man outside, but she just laughed. My dad was outside talking to him. Apparently, the guy was asking about buying the broken-down car that had been sitting in our driveway for a few months. He was a mechanic. My mom felt terrible but found the situation a bit amusing. She went out to talk to the man, and he said he felt bad for scaring us. We were given hugs and promised that the phones wouldn't be locked away the next time they left us alone. We spent the rest of the night eating pizza with choked sobs. But something still bothers me, even though it didn't at the time. Something I never really thought about before. Why would a grown man pound on the door like that, shaking the handle, trying so hard to get into a house where either the parents weren't home, or the youngest kid had clearly signaled to go get them? Why would someone want to talk about a car that didn't have a for sale sign on it? And so late at night, around 9 or 10 p.m. My parents brushed it off so lightly, but something in my gut tells me that's not how adults act. I don't think I really want to know what would have happened if my parents hadn't come home when they did. I was 14. It was an average night, around 9 p.m. My little cousin and I were at his house since I was babysitting for the night. My mom and aunt were out shopping while my dad and uncle were at the movie theater. We were sitting there, just watching TV, but I started to feel strange, like something was off. I couldn't quite figure out what it was, so I just kept watching TV with my cousin, hoping the feeling would pass. The uneasiness stayed with me, though, so I got up and decided to lock the back door. When I walked back through the kitchen, I finally saw what had been causing that feeling. In the window, there was a decrepit-looking man, appearing homeless. He was just standing there, staring into the window, looking directly at my cousin. At that moment, my instincts kicked in. I acted like I hadn't noticed him and calmly told my cousin that we should head upstairs because our parents would be home soon, and they wouldn't want him staying up too late. We went upstairs, and I put him to bed, fully aware that there was a man outside who wanted to get in. I was about 125 pounds and tall for my age, and I played football for my school, so I wasn't exactly helpless. I went back downstairs, straight into the kitchen, and grabbed a meat tenderizing hammer. When I looked back at the window where I had seen the man, he was gone. I rushed to the front door and checked that it was locked, both the deadbolt and the knob. Then, I sprinted back upstairs with the meat tenderizer in hand and went into my cousin's room. I sat down in front of the door. My cousin asked me what I was doing, and I told him not to worry about it and to keep his head down. I called the police, then my dad and uncle. The cops said they'd take about half an hour to arrive, and my dad and uncle were about 45 minutes away. Suddenly, I heard a window shatter downstairs and the heavy sound of boots walking on the main floor. I told my cousin to stay calm, hide under the covers, and keep completely silent. I could hear the man moving around downstairs. It was terrifying. I gripped the meat tenderizer tightly and waited. About 5 minutes later, I heard the boots moving up the stairs. My heart was racing. My cousin's door was only about 10 feet from the stairs. The man started opening doors, first my aunt and uncle's room, then the bathroom. After what felt like forever, I heard him walk back downstairs, and then he opened the door to the basement. 15 minutes later, the police arrived and burst into the house. It turned out the man had escaped from a mental hospital in the neighboring province. I once had something very strange happen to me, and it still scares me. My husband and I had just woken up, the sun was up, and he had gone downstairs for a moment while I sat on the bed, scrolling through my phone. Suddenly, I started feeling strange. I couldn't quite place the feeling, but it kept intensifying, so I thought maybe I was about to pass out. I decided to lie down and put my phone beside me. That's when I heard a weird zapping noise, and my head still felt off. We had an electric blanket, so I sat up, grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, and uncovered myself, thinking maybe there was an exposed wire that could be shocking me. But everything looked fine. The blanket and the wire were in perfect condition. Still, I pushed it off the bed just to be safe, lay back down, and put my phone down again, though the strange feeling lingered. Out of nowhere, someone with really long hair appeared, leaning over me, just to the left of my head. My husband has long hair, so for a split second, I thought he had come back upstairs without me noticing. But this was not my husband. I was so terrified. I brought my hands up to the sides of my face and tried to scream, but I couldn't move, and no sound came out. I struggled so hard to move because I desperately wanted to get away from whatever that thing was. The scariest part was when I raised my hands, I balled my fists, and, in my right hand, I grabbed a chunk of this person's or being's hair. I could feel the hair tangled between my fingers. I couldn't speak or move, but then I heard my husband coming up the stairs. As he got closer, everything started to fade away, and the figure vanished. As soon as I was able, I told my husband to turn on the light the moment he came through the doorway, and I sat up. I was terrified. I knew I had been awake, so I was confused and shaken. My husband knew I was awake too, which confirmed what I felt. I had been sitting up on my phone. I was not asleep. A few years later, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. I've never had another experience like that, not before or since. I'm not sure if it was a seizure that I didn't recognize, but none of my seizures ever made me see or feel something that wasn't there. It still doesn't make sense to me, and to this day it terrifies me. I was staying at an Airbnb for work for about 7 months. The very first night there, the upstairs bedroom door would unlatch, open, and I could hear what sounded like someone walking down the stairs. But when I looked, nobody was there. After the second time, I decided to check the entire house. I looked under the beds, in the closets, and absolutely everywhere. Still, I found nothing. I was petrified and almost left, but I figured that if whatever it was wanted to hurt me, it already could have. So, I apologized for intruding and asked if we could find a way to get along. After that, everything stopped for the night. For the next month or so, whenever I came home, I'd say, "Hello, I'm home." And for the most part, nothing much happened. Occasionally, I'd see large shadows out of the corner of my eye, and things would be moved around, but otherwise everything felt manageable. Things were going back to normal, and over time, I fell out of the habit of acknowledging whatever was there when I came home. I also stopped keeping the house as clean as I did in the beginning. At first, the ghost seemed cool when I was being respectful, but once I started acting like I was the only person living there, it seemed to irritate him. Apparently, I wasn't the best roommate, and he let me know. One night, I was jolted awake by loud crashing, banging, and slamming noises coming from the kitchen. I hadn't cleaned up after making dinner, and it must have upset him. When I went to the kitchen, nothing was out of place. Everything looked undisturbed, but as soon as I laid back down, the noise started again. This time, as I lay there, my entire body began to burn. It felt exactly like being under one of those red heat lamps used to keep baby chicks warm before they grow feathers. My body heated up to the point where it was unbearable, and the burning sensation was awful. I finally yelled out, asking it to stop, and in an instant, everything did. The noise, the burning, everything just stopped. After that, I made sure to say hello whenever I got home, and I cleaned up every night. There were almost no other interactions after that, but I always knew he was still there.